Hello, everybody, and welcome. It is 2 o'clock, so we'll get started. We do still have some people we're waiting on, but we always have items to take care of in the beginning. Today, we are covering the hearing number 6. I believe it's the last hearing for the Denver Green Code Committee. So congratulations, everybody. We made it. A couple of housekeeping items. We please ask that if you're on the committee, please turn your camera on. Also, please mute unless you're speaking, and also limit the chat function to business only.
I can hear.
Can you hear me?
Sorry, maybe I was on mute. I apologize.
Yep, we can hear you.
Good. No, all right, no worries. We will have a timer on the screen that'll be utilized during the Robert's Rules of Orders, and during our break, we will break about halfway through for a 5 or 10 minute break. And then for those of you that aren't familiar with Robert's Rules from the general public, we'll go over those real quick. The proposal will be introduced by the moderator, which is myself. The proponent will then give us a brief summary of that proposal. We will then go to the general public to see if anybody wants to speak in support of that proposal. They will have 2 minutes. Everybody will have 2 minutes to do so. Then we will go to the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition of that proposal, they'll have 2 minutes to speak their mind as well. We will go back to the committee at that point and ask for questions. From there, if there was somebody that spoke up in support or opposition, we will go back to the general public for rebuttals. We will do a rebuttal in support. There will be a 1 minute cap on that, and any rebuttals in opposition, there will also be a 1 minute cap on that. From there, back to the committee for any modifications, any motions, any further discussions, what have you. So with that being said, we utilize the raise your hand function. So I want to make sure everybody can do that. Go ahead if you're on the committee or in the general public, please raise your hand to make sure you have that ability. That is how we communicate and know if you have something to say. We want to make sure everybody can do that. For the record today, we have Kyra and Kristen on the line. They will be swapping back and forth for being our note takers and subject matter experts, just so you know if you see those names on the screen. All right, good. I saw hands go up. So with that being said, before we get started on the first one, I want to make sure we have quorum. And I see a head nod that we do.
Oh, no, I was agreeing that we need to make sure we have quorum. I wasn't saying we did. No, I do want to say also, we are very, very close today, even if everyone shows up who has not let us know they will not be here. We're right on the edge. So just FYI to everybody.
I think right now we have 9 voting members in attendance. So we need 1 more person to jump on.
Okay, well, we will hold tight for a few minutes here to make sure maybe someone can hop on. Kristen or Kyra, do you want to name off who's missing and see if anybody maybe from the general public is filling in?
I don't see Cheryl. I don't see Travis. I know he'll be late. Let's see. Who else? Austin. And Anthony. Oh, sorry, Antonio. Those are the people we're missing.
Okay.
That let us know that they couldn't attend.
And I didn't see any hands go up from the general public, so I don't know if anybody knows.
This is Austin, and for some reason mine's coming up as Jeff Terrell. I can try logging out and see if I have a second link, or you can just know that I'm here as Jeff Terrell today.
Okay, that works. Then we're good, because Jeff is a non-voting member, so we're good.
Yeah, I don't know how this is showing up as him, which is really strange, but
Austin, you should be able to change that, and the little 3 little dots in the top right of your square there. You should be able to rename it. There you go. You got it.
I just changed it for you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Cool.
Okay, we're good.
All right, sweet. So item number P 8.3. Let's see if we got Webley or Rebecca on the line. Looks like Webley's going to talk. Webley, please introduce yourself, and then I will pull up your proposal and give us a summary on that.
Great. Hi, my name is Webley Bowles. I am with New Buildings Institute. Do I need to turn my camera on?
No, you
Okay.
can go right ahead.
All right, great. So code change proposal 8.3, which is embodied carbon of CO2 for concrete materials, requires environmental product declarations, which are EPDs, for all complying concrete used in the project. Additionally, concrete mixes except precast, those where no concrete providers have EPDs within 100 miles, and projects that use less than 50 cubic yards must meet specific global warming potential limits, and those are GWPs. So complying products can also meet the requirements doing a weighted average GWP of all concrete mixes. Building materials account for 11% of global GHG emissions, with the majority of those being related to steel and concrete. As the Energy Code does its job in reducing operational emissions, the emissions from building materials will start to become a larger part of the total carbon footprint for buildings. To minimize the impacts of these materials, we need to reduce the GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions from the most common building materials and those with the highest emissions, in which concrete and steel typically account for 50% of total material emissions in commercial projects. The proposal will support Denver's climate goals, especially with the limited mandatory use of Denver Green Code on the projected 50 million square feet of new construction as Denver continues to grow. Concrete will be a key ingredient on nearly every single one of those projects, and Colorado has really been a leader in sustainable building practices, including recent legislation on the procurement of low carbon building materials for state projects. And this proposal is in line with those requirements. So publicly available EPDs from concrete providers has allowed the proposal to include material emissions, GHG emissions values, which are about 50% of the concrete suppliers can meet today. While Colorado has over 500 EPDs, which is more than most states, the values in this proposal are based off the 50th percentile of the national EPD global warming potential values, which is more conservative than the research showed for Colorado concrete. So we expect the numbers of EPDs to grow in Colorado as Buy Clean Colorado rolls out. This proposal is aligned with Buy Clean Colorado, it's important to note, and this code change can be met with little to no project level cost increase, and that many manufacturers with EPDs in Colorado can comply with the proposal as written. Further, the industry has already started to adapt to this type of regulation. When a similar code change proposal was presented to Denver IBC committee, the public testimony included industry support for low carbon concrete. The Global Cement and Concrete Association put forth the goal of reducing emissions by 50% by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050. Existing state and federal procurement policies like Buy Clean have changed how the industry provides and responds to GHG emissions requirements and materials, specifically concrete and steel. The recent announcement from GSA, General Services Administration, and they are a major purchaser of concrete and steel. They said that they will only buy low carbon concrete. And their research has shown that 82% of replying concrete producers are already providing complying materials with these values. So adopting this code change proposal will require some concrete suppliers to improve their mixes for the sake of addressing city and state GHG emission reduction goals as Denver continues to grow at a fast pace and use more concrete, but many of the EPDs in Colorado currently already comply. So I propose the adoption of 8.2.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to put you on mute just for the time being, but we're going to go to the committee to see if there are any questions at this time. Committee, this is your time to ask the proponent questions. Christy, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about potential costs that are, the proposal indicates that there would not be added construction or design costs. And I'm just interested to know a little bit more about what's behind that conclusion that there would not be additional costs associated with this.
There you go. So research has shown that cost is not necessarily an issue at the project level. There can be an additional cost when it comes to the development of the EPD for many of the manufacturers. So research has shown that at the project level, there's either a cost savings because there's a reduction in the amount of concrete that's being used in the project, or up to a 1% cost increase. And this is because any cost that is accounted for at the producer level is shaken out over multiple projects. So there's limited increase for projects.
Okay, thank you. As a point of order, I messed up. So we are supposed to go to the general public first before questions, so that's my fault. So committee, hang tight with your questions. I want to first go to the general public to see if anybody wants to speak in support of this proposal. Anybody who wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. I see Rebecca. Rebecca, please introduce yourself, and then you will have 2 minutes.
Thanks, Kevin. My name is Rebecca. I'm with RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, and I support the adoption of this proposed language. Just to reinstate the Colorado Buy Clean law, the global warming potential limits as laid out in this proposal are comparable to the limits currently being established by the state architect for the state Buy Clean law. My team's advising on that. And the state here is really leading by example with Buy Clean legislation. Local manufacturers will need to comply with Buy Clean if they wish to participate in state projects. So this code change proposal is really following suit. Webley mentioned that some manufacturers will need to adjust their current mix designs to comply. The good news here is that due to a long history of innovation in the concrete industry, many tried and true solutions already exist to lower the embodied carbon content of concrete. This code change proposal is not asking for a shift to embrace emerging or expensive technology, but rather the solutions have been available for a long time. And although there are costs to producing EPDs for the manufacturer, the concrete industry has been disclosing the environmental impacts of their products for quite some time now, and it's competitive to do so. Because there is disclosure happening, the technology solutions are here already, and low carbon products are cost competitive compared to conventional products. This is a really great opportunity to reduce one of the biggest emission impacts from the building industry. And I just want to call out a 2021 analysis by RMI and Skanska Construction showed that concrete as much as 33% lower in embodied carbon than conventional concrete can be purchased for less than 1% cost premium, which is just sort of within the margin of error for any construction project. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else from the general public that would like to speak in support of this proposal? Please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody else from the general public that wants to speak in support of the proposal, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition? Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition? Seeing none, I will now go back to the committee. And committee, now this is your time to ask questions if you have any. Josh, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for this proposal. This looks great. I think these are just more clarifications. You answered most of the questions I had about alignment with the state regs. This doesn't distinguish at all about the amount of CO2 from energy related impacts versus process related impacts, right? And the reason I ask is sort of I wonder if there's, you know, is there any sort of like benefit that a given concrete producer might be from sourcing material in a, you know, a grid region that's got high renewables, and they could use a lot of more electricity than coke or whatever is used as this sort of energy foundation. I assume it doesn't matter. CO2 is CO2, and if the EPD says that's what it is, that's what it is. But I'm kind of curious: is there any sort of thought of that in here, or should there be?
Josh, that's a great question. The amount of embodied carbon within any material does take into account the local grid emissions, and any place that does have, you know, a cleaner grid will likely have a lower GWP content for their material. When it comes to concrete though, concrete has multiple areas. So concrete is not always dominated by the energy used to produce the product. So that's why we chose to go with the metric of GWP, because it does allow multiple ways to comply. So if a carbon capture was included on a cement mill, then that, and you were to use that cement in a project, it would likely have a lower embodied carbon, assuming that was taken into account in the EPD.
Great. Can you also, Webley, do you happen to know for Colorado the breakdown between processed CO2 versus fossil-based energy CO2 versus electricity-based CO2?
I do not have that off the top of my head.
Not off the top of your head? Okay, fair. I'll also sort of note that this or clarify that while like the International Living Future Institute requires you to develop a baseline and show a reduction, this doesn't do that. This is just showing GWP. ILFI also has, I believe, an absolute amount of something like 500 kilograms per cubic meter for the entire project. This doesn't limit the amount of concrete that you might use. It just sort of says that the concrete you do use, however much of it, needs to have a GWP below a certain threshold. Is that all accurate?
Correct. Yeah, this proposal looks at a materials based instead of a whole building based, which is what ILFI Living Building Standard looks at. And the baseline is here, and we don't set requirements as to how much concrete you can use as long as it meets these requirements. So it's pretty flexible. And we have the option for that high early strength concrete and lightweight concrete, and the alternative way to comply with the weighted average calculation.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for the person from RMI for clarifying. This proposal looks really great.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? Daniel, go ahead.
A quick question. So I understand this embodied energy concept. If this is carbon release that's before the concrete is manufactured and put, or before it's put into the building, correct? It's on the manufacturing side.
Correct.
And if it is on the manufacturing side, I mean, we regulate, like I review energy compliance for buildings, and we limit how much energy the building can be designed to use. So if the manufacturing of concrete were regulated in the same way to limit the embodied energy in the manufacturing, would that solve this, or would this still be a necessary piece of code? So if that were regulated on the manufacturing side, would that solve the concern?
I think that might be an essay question in a really large research project. And I think that's, you could solve this issue by regulating manufacturing, or you could solve this issue from the demand side in asking architects and design teams to select low embodied carbon concrete. From my understanding and talking to those that work at the national level on national level manufacturing policy, this sort of policy that you're speaking about would take multiple years to achieve. where it can be done through design tactics. So there's multiple ways of achieving it rather than purely regulating manufacturing.
Is it that there's no national desire to regulate this, or are there other roadblocks?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I think it is absolutely a path towards decarbonization, and I don't think it's an and or. I think it's a both. It's a both and both.
Okay, thank you.
Next question comes from Josh.
I was just going to potentially respond to Daniel's question as well. Is that appropriate?
Yep, go right ahead.
Yeah, I think from the development industry perspective, my read on is that there's a huge need and opportunity just to create a demand signal for certain types of products. And so that, as maybe Webley was kind of saying, like regulation, I feel like would be unlikely to happen until some sort of established, market for a lot of these. And so this is a great way, I think, to do that. So I was glad to see the state do it, and hopefully more states and cities sort of get around to doing the same sort of thing. So once there's a demand, I think it becomes much easier to regulate supply.
Yes, my only question was about how to create the demand, whether to create it with regulation on the, I guess, we regulate what goes into the building because of the quality of the building, not so much because of the process that precedes it being incorporated into the building, typically. But this could, as you're saying, this could trigger the demand. But the state is more of a customer that's actually demanding, and I'm sure there are other customers that are non-government entities that also demand the same.
Okay, last call, any final questions for the proponent at this time? Okay, seeing none, we will go back to the general public to see if anybody wants to have a rebuttal and support. Please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that would like to have a rebuttal and support, please raise your hand. Third and final call, any rebuttals and support? Seeing none, we had no one speak up in opposition, so I'll go back to the committee now for discussion or to make a motion. Yeah, Josh, go ahead.
Motion, we pass this thing as it is. Adopted.
Okay.
Second it.
Okay. Courtney?
Yeah, I have no problem with what Josh just said. So I'll leave that be. I support this proposal.
All right. So there's a motion to approve as written and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, I will call, before I call a vote, I just want to make sure we still got 10 voting members. Can we confirm that still? Okay, I got the thumbs up.
Okay.
All right. So all those in favor of passing as written, please raise your hand. Eight, go ahead and lower your hands. Oh, there was a nice that popped up. Sorry about that. All those opposed, please raise your hand. I see one. And go ahead and lower your hands. And all those abstaining. I see 0. Okay, that makes 10. Good. So this passes. Thank you very much. So that brings us to item P 8.4. And Webley, are you going to speak to this one as well, or is that going to be Rebecca? Webley.
All right. So again, Webley Bowles New Buildings Institute. Code change proposal 8.4 embodied carbon of steel materials includes 2 components. The first requires EPDs for 75% of structural steel products by weight or cost. The second portion requires low carbon steel for 75% of structural steel products. the structural steel products can comply with the second requirement by either meeting specific global warming potential or GWP limits, or by purchasing products produced in a facility that procures renewable energy. The lower carbon steel can support Denver's climate goals to reduce GHG emissions by 100% by 2040. The steel is one of the most widely used materials in commercial building construction and a primary contributor to the embodied carbon in buildings next to concrete. The US steel industry alone makes up 2% of the total US greenhouse gas emissions, with half of those emissions being used for steel in the built environment. With several steel mills and manufacturing plants in Colorado, the reduction of local steel greenhouse gas emissions will support state and local GHG emission reduction goals. The largest driver of steel's emissions is the energy used during production. So the option for steel mills to procure renewable energy instead of meeting a specific GWP limit is the option here. And this provides consistency in lowering a product's embodied carbon. While it's not accounted for in the GWP, it is being shown by using renewable energy. While all building products should be addressed, concrete and steel account for about 50% of a building's total embodied carbon. And that's why these two proposals address these materials now. Publicly available EPD data has allowed the proposal to include conservative emissions values for EPDs, and industry-wide EPDs have allowed the global warming potential values to be set at 150% of industry average. And that means that it's about the 75th or 80th percentile of most steel. So that cuts out the worst performing 20% of steel. And most of that steel, excuse me, is not American made. So this would potentially encourage American made products. This research and our work to understand the industry impact shows that the proposal can be met with little to no project cost increase, and that many manufacturers with EPDs currently comply with the proposal as written. But to move the full industry, we need to measure and manage this. Compliance for this could potentially mean indicating EPDs and global warming potential in the project specifications, and at the time of permit intake indicate how much the purchased materials will be reported. Prior to occupancy, project teams can illustrate compliance through a material global warming potential spreadsheet and supporting EPD documentation. So I propose the adoption of 8.4.
Thank you. I will go to the general public. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Rebecca, go ahead and introduce yourself again, and I will give you 2 minutes to do so.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm Rebecca from Rocky Mountain Institute, and I support the adoption of this proposed code language. Structural steel and steel reinforcement material categories are also included in the Colorado State BiClean law, with the global warming potential limits set at the industry average. So again, steel manufacturers should be primed to provide EPDs and comply with these new regulations from the state, and then hopefully from this code proposal. Like concrete, there are tried and true solutions to reduce the carbon footprint of steel materials. And these policies will really help move the needle on climate change by reducing emissions that come from steel manufacturing. For a long time now, we have been focused on regulating building emissions by enacting solutions that target energy used in the operation of buildings. But the use of low carbon material products during construction reduces emissions before a building is even occupied. So it's really this preemptive approach to reduce emissions happening right now, not 10 to 15 years into a building's life. Embodied carbon is an urgent issue that we need to address today in order to meet Denver's goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support? Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition? Third and final call, anybody from the general public wants to speak in opposition? Seeing none, I'll go to the committee. Committee, this is your time for questions. Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was noticing that the steel that's covered under this does not include angles or channels or other steel that there's plenty of in a building. And I was wondering if that was a conscious decision or whether you were just sort of going for the biggest pieces of steel. I know it seems like we may as well include that as well because there's lots of that kind of steel too.
Yeah, Jonathan, you're right. We are going after these largest pieces of steel for a couple of reasons. One, the data is available to be able to set global warming potential limits for these. And there was concern when we've had construction conversations with the steel industry about tracking the amount of small pieces of steel. So steel is often it's a large price tag. Getting it from a fabricator provides kind of easy documentation. So there is a possibility in the future to add on to this. And I think that's what's beneficial about this proposal is that it is flexible and able to be expanded.
All right, next question comes from Josh.
Thanks. Once again, thank you both for bringing this proposal and speaking to it. I'm not an expert in how steel is manufactured, but I understand that there's essentially two general buckets. One is electric arc furnace, the other is blast oxygen. No, sorry, blast oxygen furnace. One is essentially electric driven. The other, I believe, is kind of like fossil driven, sort of through coke. And my understanding further is that that recycled steel tends to go the electric arc furnace route, that those tend to be much lower global warming potential type steel, and that the blast oxygen furnace tends to be much higher in terms of emissions. I guess what I'm getting to is, you said that most steel made in the US, I think, would fall under this limit. Is that just because this limit is targeted to essentially filter out the blast oxygen furnace that would likely kind of be maybe manufactured in China and imported? Or is there sort of more nuance in terms of selecting steel that is electric but still lower emissions electric than other steel? In other words, like how much of what we typically would buy in the US would really essentially need to sort of come down further than where it already is, or is it just trying to sort of keep it in the recycled electric bucket? Did that make sense? That didn't feel very articulate.
Your comment, I think, is spot on. I'm not quite sure I totally understand your question, but I do want to mention that our intent is not to select one sort of manufacturing type. This could be achieved through blast arc furnaces that maybe use hydrogen or an alternative type of steel there that is lower carbon. So there are different ways of complying. And I think that's the benefit of setting that GWP limit, in that you can comply in multiple different ways. And yeah, did that answer your question?
Yes, well, it's helping me ask a better question. In the absence of using hydrogen for BOF furnaces or carbon capture and storage, would these limits allow for any BOF steel? And would they allow for all electric arc furnace steel?
I'm trying to think back to my analysis and identifying the EPDs that we reviewed and trying to remember what the production was. And I don't specifically remember seeing many, if any, blast arc furnaces. So I think your assumption is right, is that blast furnaces have a higher carbon content, primarily because they're not using recycled content. And also the main production is with a fossil fuel.
But-
How many would meet this requirement from those facilities? I don't have that data.
Okay, so it's not necessarily the case that all electric arc furnaces would meet this, come under the threshold.
Correct.
Okay. Is it the case that all recycled steel would fall underneath it?
Not necessarily, because recycled is, as you know, a very large word. It could mean 25% recycled. It could be 95% recycled. And that's why we see lower embodied carbon when it comes to steel reinforcing bars. It's because they often have 95 to 99% recycled content in it. And so we're able to see a lower GWP value there.
Do you happen to have any statistics about the amount of steel in the US, of all the steel in the US that's produced, how much of it is recycled content? Yeah, do you happen to know that number?
I don't know that number, but I do know that a large percentage of steel in the US uses recycled content because most steel in the US uses electric arc furnaces.
And those two are correlated. I didn't make that up, right?
No, those are correlated. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Jonathan, go ahead.
I guess I had a question about whether or not there was consideration for including the transportation emissions associated with getting the steel. As you mentioned, a lot of it is coming from China. And I was wondering if there's a way to sort of encourage not shipping enormously heavy beams and stuff such long distances.
Some of that does show up in the EPD, but this is primarily looking at stages A1 through A3, which is the harvesting, production, and manufacturing of the product. Also, I want to note that often when it comes to transportation methods, shipping is actually lower carbon than, say, shipping it on or putting it on a truck and moving it across land, because it's often being moved with many other materials. So I think it would be great to include transportation emissions. I do think that that adds an added layer of complexity because it varies by project. And I think that's something that could be added in the Green Code at a future point to expand the scope of emissions that's being accounted for within embodied carbon.
Next question comes from Josh.
Wow, sorry, I didn't see Daniel had one. I'll make this quick. I originally was concerned about the renewable language that you had included below. If you want to scroll down to it, those kind of, but then I think that these 5 options for renewables actually feel credible in the right list of options. I think it's down below a little further. Is this list of they're right there, 1 through 5, is that unique to this section, or does this repeat itself throughout somewhere? Because yeah, I'm just sort of curious if we define credible offsite renewables in various places in this exercise.
So this is not currently in IGCC 2021, but they will be in the next version. So these definitions have been approved and are moving forward in code.
In other ICC codes, you mean?
Correct.
Okay, I maybe a question for Christy. Does this language appear elsewhere in the kind of green code language that we've been talking about, either ours or other committees?
No, I don't believe that it does.
Okay, I have no problem with it, but I just wanted to sort of call attention to it.
And I can also note that this code language or these definitions and descriptions here are included in the 0 code as well, which is obvious. It's, it's voluntary.
Thank you. Next question comes from Daniel.
Thank you. So Rebecca mentioned that the impact from this type of code change could impact materials that are manufactured even somewhat immediately, even before they're proposed to be put into a building. Is that also true for materials manufactured at the same facilities for other purposes? Could this impact be broader than the building industry? If the building industry demands a certain steel manufacturing process, could that then lower the carbon emissions for steel manufacturing in general, or are facilities typically just specific to building?
There is a rippling effect as the market starts to evolve. So in Europe, we've seen that automakers have secured nearly all of the zero carbon steel that's being produced to be able to be used in automobiles, and that's actually put demand in the market for additional. So yes, I think that this is also showing that impact from the automobile industry to the building industry, and it can go the opposite way in that the building industry can put pressure on other steel manufacturing and steel purchasers for this lower embodied carbon steel. And infrastructure is another large place to consider lower embodied carbon steel, which this proposal does not address because this is purely buildings. But as more of that material is on the market, there will be more interest for it.
Thank you.
Last call for questions from the committee. Adam, go ahead.
Thanks. I thought I had my hand up, but it just went down. Hi, Webley. Question about the finance. I'm concerned about the financial renewable energy agreements and kind of buying your way out of creating GHGs, which I know that it's an energy intense manufacturing process to begin with, and the cost of renewable energy credits are so high now anyway that I don't see how that component can work. What do you think the impact of just removing that from this proposal is, and not having a way to buy yourself out of polluting through manufacturing steel?
I think it's an option. The reason that I like seeing that the renewable procurement for steel mills in this proposal is that it provides an alternative, because at this point there is no other alternative except to meet the GWP limit. And if that can't be met, then what does a project team do? The other thing to note is, Adam, I think you hit on this just a little bit, is that steel plants use a large amount of energy. They're not always able to have that renewable energy on site to be able to produce their steel, because they're using it in such high quantities and high capacity. And so the renewable agreement kind of allows for this transition to a green hydrogen sort of future, and being able to support the renewable industry. I'm curious to hear if there's interest in removing that, if there's concern about only having one compliance path.
One thing I want to add to that is that my concern is that there are manufacturers that will just pay the penalty and won't even consider a route to get to any other option, whatever option that is, whether it's on-site renewables or hydrogen production or whatever it is. They're just gonna pay that cost, unless the cost is so high that it doesn't make financial sense, which there's a good chance that would happen in this market right now. So
I hear your concern. I'm curious to hear others.
Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to Adam's comment. It's a good one. I was thinking about this in terms of the various scopes of emissions, right? So there's scope 1 emissions, which would not be present at a electric arc furnace place, right? That's entirely scope 2. Let's say they have their own generator. And in my mind, to use the renewable options that are provided for scope 2 emissions feels totally appropriate. It feels consistent with things like Science-Based Targets Initiative, other kind of like corporate net zero accounting definitions and protocols. So, and again, because notably you can't just buy RECs here, I think the buying out of it is really just essentially, well, you're using electricity. So using an offsite source of renewables that you've secured, like a physical or virtual PPA, which are listed here, or community solar garden. I mean, all that feels like it should be allowed. But having said that, it should lower the GWP. So I'm not exactly sure why it's necessary. If you're allowed to use offsite renewables within your carbon accounting to lower your GWP, then why do you need to even state it? I don't think that someone should be able to use offsite renewables to offset scope 1 emissions from a blast oxygen furnace. That feels like it would not like create the signal that we wanted to create in the market. So I guess the question is the way this is written, can you use offsite renewables to offset scope 1?
So, scope 1. Okay, so I want to kind of step back. I'm trying not to go too far down the rabbit hole here, but currently environmental product declarations do not include offsite renewable energy. And there may be a benefit for that, and there may not be. It's dependent upon the product category rule, the PCR, which sets the rules for the development of the environmental product declaration. And so one of the reasons that we included this is because a lot of steel manufacturers cannot include that on-site renewable energy. So this option allows for that renewable energy to be procured off-site, and it still has that community benefit to it. So in terms of the scope 1 emissions, I'm not sure that, I think that's a corporate accounting question that doesn't quite apply to this conversation. And I'm happy to be proved wrong, because this is being applied to the code, and it would not be double counting if it was applied elsewhere. Josh, does that answer your question?
Well, I'm sort of, I guess, could steel that came with a lot of scope 1 emissions associated with it, and had a very high GWP, use offsite renewable procurement, essentially offsetting, you're offsetting your coal usage or coke usage. You're using renewables to offset like fossil fuel usage. Could a product like that then meet the standard? I don't think a product like
yes.
That. Okay.
Yeah. I think technically the way that it's written, it could comply.
Can we change to electricity offsets? I mean, would something like that address the issue? Because I don't think that steel from a BOF furnace should be able to be compliant unless they were doing sequestration on site, in which case their GWP would be low.
Can we look at the code language here together for the procurement? So these are the definitions. Just down just a little bit more. So it says not less than 50% of the energy sourced for production at the facility. So it's energy, not electricity. And if that was to be changed to electricity, that would not exclude the blast. It would change the way that language read for any sort of blast oxygen furnace, because their energy use is much lower because their fossil fuels is much higher. So it'd be easier for them to comply if that only said electricity.
Okay, next question comes from Daniel.
Just to speak to what was being discussed, I wouldn't have a problem removing the financial movable energy because I think the proponent was saying, what if a project's in a pinch? We're not talking about a project in a pinch. We're talking at this point about an elective or a code or a voluntary code. And I think that we're trying to encourage that the manufacturing actually change. If we were just looking to offset emissions, why couldn't the project itself buy renewable energy, which that's something we discuss and when we write energy codes all the time. Can a project not be energy efficient and just buy renewables instead? And most often, for many aspects of the code, the answer is no, because you're trying to actually have an efficient building. And I think it's the same here with trying to manufacture more efficiently. I don't know that we're gaining anything with this financial renewables. And I don't think, again, that projects will be in a pinch if they're opting for this path.
Okay, thank you. Seeing that there are no more questions from the committee, I will go back to the general public to see if anybody wants to have a rebuttal and support. If anybody wants to have a rebuttal and support, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to have a rebuttal and support, please raise your hand. Third and final call, any rebuttals and support? Seeing none and seeing that there was no speaking up on oppositions, we will go back to the committee for discussion. Daniel, I see your hands up, but I think it was still left up. Yep. Okay. Anybody have a discussion or anybody want to make a motion? Josh, go ahead.
Adam, you go ahead. I've been talking too much on this one.
No, go ahead. I want to hear what you're going to say.
Well, I think we need to address this issue before we move on, because there's been some good discussion around it. I think the choices that we have are to either strip the language for number 3 out so that you can't use renewable energy at all, as kind of Daniel was suggesting. I'm sensitive to the idea that there might be a steel mill in, outside of Cleveland that has a dirty grid that hasn't cleaned up yet. And then there's a steel mill in Washington State, and they're essentially just as efficient. They're both using all electricity, but we're going to make one preferential to the other. Whereas what I would like to do is encourage that steel mill in Cleveland to help the greening of that grid region by supporting an offsite renewable energy development that's associated with its production. I feel like that's consistent with the way that we want a lot of these kind of like changes to happen out in the system. So, to me, the right solution would be to say, that a manufacturer can modify. I don't know enough about EPDs, so Webley, like, this is stupid that you could say so. That manufacturer can modify its EPDs to essentially use off the offsite renewables energies that are listed there to reduce electricity related emissions that are part of the EPD, but may not use it to offset scope 1 emissions associated with it. If that is too complicated and can't be done as a real bear accounting wise, then I think we need to get rid of the renewable energy option, because I don't think we want to end up with allowing again, BOF furnaces with high emissions inventories to just use renewable procurement and not change the way that the steel industry functions. So I think we have a couple choices, and I'm kind of curious if people who know more about EPDs think that my suggestion is feasible.
Thank you. Next up is Adam.
I think we lost Webley, actually. I don't see her on my screen, but Josh, you're way more optimistic than I am. I wonder if there's a middle ground for that financial renewable energy component where we put 25% instead of not less than 50% of energy sourced for production at the facility as a renewable energy. resources as so we find some middle ground for buying your way out of polluting, but not letting them do it 100% of the 50%, if that makes sense. So I guess that's not as much of a, I guess I would need someone to chime in on that just as a QC, because I'm not sure if that would even work, but it's just an idea.
I think you're going the wrong way with it. I think you would mean not less than 75%, I believe, right?
Well, I'd say leave the 50%, but then have a separate option for the renewable energy purchase. So allowing you to buy your way out less with the renewable energy and have to use the other options more. I might be getting too convoluted. I don't know.
Well, maybe, so I've heard that Webley's back and maybe can answer, but I didn't think you could mix these different compliance pathways, but I may be wrong.
That's my understanding as well, is that the 75% meeting the EPD requirements is different than option 3, which is that at least 50% of the energy for production is renewables, etc. I just want to remind this group that we're typically going to be regulating this on the contractor purchasing, deferred submittal, information comes in, the inspector, someone, and of course it could evolve how this is inspected, but we're looking for something that someone could look at and say this material is certified, or it's difficult for us to add complexity to what the facility is doing in order to meet our code. It's much easier if we have one option, which is, this is the embodied energy that's allowed for this material, and that's, we're hoping that someone's going to help document that so that it's evident on the materials and it could be submitted as such. It's difficult if there are multiple options, especially if those options are not at the building construction level and site. Those options are at the manufacturing facility. I think adding complexity there will be difficult.
Okay, there is a request that maybe we open it back up to Webley. We'll need a vote on that, but I want to make sure everybody on the committee has an opportunity to have discussion amongst each other first before we call that vote. So the next hand up is Travis. Travis, you're on mute still. If you had something to say, looks like you're on your phone. So if you're using your phone to unmute, you would hit *6. There you go.
All right, I'm unmuted now. Thanks. Yeah, so I think I understand the idea of, it's a lot easier if you can have one pass and you roll it into a spec book, somebody provides a document on submittal and inspection. And I see where Adam's coming from in regard to talking about not having people just buy their ways out of this. But I'd like to loop back to something that was said earlier in regard to an example in Europe where auto manufacturers are buying up all this steel, and it's created a demand issue. In our marketplace, when we talk about creating a huge amount of demand, we're talking about an escalation of costs. And we narrow this down so only a few people can do it. A lot of industries can't just pivot on a dime. We're talking about large infrastructure changes. So the ability to buy out of something like that, in Josh's example, is exactly how there's a holistic change to a marketplace. By saying that the ones on dirty grids, then all of a sudden they have an impetus to improve it. Right now, you can buy off-site credits in Boulder. If you can't meet solar requirements, there's a variety of ways for those trade-offs to happen. Yes, it is a little bit more difficult in the permitting and I don't really see a reason why this is being focused on so heavily. You know, talking about eliminating that out of a elective code section is something that sounds like should be happening down the road of implementation. Because if we're creating a single path, all we're doing is creating and obstructing people from choosing that path. In my opinion, especially when we're coming down to like anything below 60 units on a residential multifamily building down to single family. But that's my 2 cents in the matter. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion from the panel? Travis, I'm going to lower your hand. All right, since there was a request to let Webley speak to some of the discussion, I'll call a vote on that. It is up to you all, since we had closed that section of it, whether or not you all as a committee want to hear her, let her have another few minutes to chime in on this. So I'll call a vote on that. All those in favor of allowing Webley to chime in for a few more minutes, please raise your hand. Okay, I see, okay, 10, all right.
Thank you for voting to let me in. So I just wanted to speak to Josh's comment specifically about ways that we can like modify an EPD, just to say that the EPD is a third-party verified document, and that we cannot change the way that that EPD is accounting for embodied carbon unless we change the entire process, which is a years-long process. So I wanted to mention that while we could come up with some sort of complicated math to address this combination of offsite renewables and what's in the EPD, I think that that's complicated, and I think that there's a concern about how the users of this code would be able to address that when we have a couple of paths here that are fairly straightforward.
Thank you. All right, Josh.
Quick question for Webley. Is this language with the offsite renewables consistent with the state procurement?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
It's not. It is not consistent. I can't tell you all the details, but it's not 100% consistent.
Daniel, your hand's up next.
I may have missed the detail of that. Can you repeat whether this specific option 3 that we're discussing, is that something that is also third-party certified as part of meeting the EPD that we're looking for? Is that an option in that third-party certification, or is it not?
Are these 5 requirements third-party, or is that what you're asking?
In other words, you mentioned that the EPD is something that is certified on the product.
Correct.
So is option 3, is that built into that certification, that that's a path for the certifier to say this is an EPD compliant, or is that a path for us to say, as the authority having jurisdiction, that the facility submit to us their energy sources for production, etc.?
Option 3 would come from the manufacturer. Well, it would come from the manufacturer to the design team. It is not included in the environmental product declaration.
Okay, if that's the case, I'm a little confused how it even works. Is this for the production of the facility during the time that this specific steel that's going into this building was produced, or is it for a year, or is it in that moment in time that it's submitted? And do I get a full expense paid trip to go out and tour the facility and make sure that they switch on that generator or whatever they're powering from during that time? Like it just I'm confused as how that what it even means from a building authority in Denver having to even attempt to regulate that.
I hear your concern, and no, you don't get a free trip, but oftentimes on when you procure offsite renewables, there is a contract in place, and that contract would be what would be provided. And I think that there is a question, you bring up a great point about how do we verify that this specific steel was manufactured. And I think the intent is that you don't necessarily know if the steel was produced 2 years before the renewable energy was purchased or procured, but it is showing that that mill has a dedicated commitment to renewable energy.
Okay, thank you. All right, committee, we've had our questions, we've had our discussions. Anybody want to make a motion? Josh.
Yeah, I motion that we approve this proposal, but we strike out the elements that are not EPD related. I think to the discussion that we just had last with Daniel's point, it seems sort of confusing and potentially problematic on a number of levels to allow this. If it were consistent with the way that the state procurement had it written, I would maybe just say, okay, and we'll all kind of figure it out together. But if it's not, it just seems like maybe we're digging ourselves a hole. Also, I don't know why you wouldn't have the exact same out for the concrete, since you're using renewables to offset a different fuel in both cases. It made more sense for steel because steel is mostly electric, but as soon as we allow other things. So sorry, that's more of an explanation. So I guess I motion that we strike 2 and 3 and approve without those.
Okay, so there's a motion to strike these 2 on the screen, right? Item number 2, number 3. Did I do that correctly? All right. Is there a second? Daniel.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Courtney.
Yeah, thank you for this really great discussion. I guess I would like to just hear really briefly from Webley if striking those 2 options out. I know we've talked a lot about it, but just to confirm what we're seeing on screen, but with striking those out, is this proposal like functional moving forward? Are we missing something here? Thank you.
I think the concern about striking these out has been mentioned in that you're only providing one way of compliance, where you could leave it in, and if people use it, they use it. But that's a decision for the city. But yes, it is functional, striking out these 2.
Any other discussion?
Yeah, just to sort of, I think the concern that it's limiting feels to me like not a big concern because, I think as Webley mentioned, most steel in the US that is electric arc furnace and is recycled content based would meet the standard. So we're not going to be asking for people to jump through hoops of doing on-site carbon capture sequestration or using hydrogen for the most part, I believe. And so I feel like it's viable without the 2 and 3, which is why I feel like it's okay.
All right, final discussion before I call a vote. Okay, seeing none, there was a motion to approve with the amendment of striking 2 and 3. So that's what we're voting on. And I'll just keep in mind, if you don't agree with striking 2 and 3, there can be a new motion as well on that. So you're voting on approving this with also taking out items number 2 and 3. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I have a count of 3. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. I have 6. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those abstaining, please raise your hand. I have 2. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. So that motion does not pass. So what I'll do is undo. Maybe I can undo. There we go. That, so the proposal is still on the table as written. Is there a motion? Does anybody want to make a new motion? Courtney.
I'll make a motion to now approve as written.
Okay, there's a motion to approve as written. Is there a second? Jonathan.
I'll second it.
Okay, great. Any discussion?
Just one thing, is that, are those numbered correctly? Is it goes 1, 2, and then it goes 2, 3. I'm wondering if we just need to change that. Oh, it is.
It might
Okay.
be easier if it was an A or a B down here.
Yeah, that would be better. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Any further discussion? There's a motion to approve as written and a second. I'll call a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. The 8, go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. The 2, go ahead and lower your hands. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. 1. Okay, so it passes 8 to 2 to 1 as written. Go ahead and lower your hands, and thank you all for your conversations on this. All right, next item of business is number 79C, and Kristen, I believe that one is yours. So why don't you go ahead and give us a summary on that?
Yeah, give me 1 second. I'm switching from note taking. So give me 1 second. All right. So this is the low VOC materials proposal. And there are some adjustments that need to be made. The original proposal was to move more categories into mandatory. We did also hear this in the IRC and the IBC, and it did pass in the IRC. So now we're trying to rectify where the gaps are. So initially, if you scroll down, Kevin, this information was in the DGC to begin with. And we are just trying to make sure that whatever was not approved in the IRC is still in the DGC. And so those are the categories of insulation, furniture, and shoot, there's one more. Keep going down.
Composite wood.
No, the composite wood got into IRC. It's the like the you're fine there. Sorry, let me bring it up on my screen so I can see the whole thing. Yes, sorry, you're correct. The composite wood. So this would just be to align the two codes and to backfill what didn't get approved in the IBC. And so I don't think that there's too much here to review and approve, because it was really something that was previously included in the DGC. And I don't know if Courtney or Eric or Christy want to address how we're gonna allow this for the residential versus commercial buildings for DGC versus in base code.
This is Eric. So I'm not exactly sure if I understand the question. I mean, the residential and then commercial multifamily buildings are defined. So it would simply be a matter of a general statement that indicates it's only applicable from a residential or a small residential perspective.
Is there anything in the proponents, in the proposal that is different from the current Denver Green Code, this language here, other than the word mandatory?
Daniel, I'm gonna pause right there until we get to the question period.
Okay, I thought that was the proponent's question, was whether we need to discuss whether this is a proposal or it's not a proposal. I thought that was what was being asked.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, can I answer that?
Yep.
So there are a few minor modifications. As you can see, there are some that are highlighted in yellow, and then some that are underlined. So we just gave some more clarification. There was some initial feedback from those two other code hearing committees that we were referencing a California standard. So we put in other language here in terms of green guard to allow for additional standards that are related back to these materials, to give further options to look for green guard as well as the CDPH standard method.
Okay, so this should be voted on now as a proposal to amend the current DGC for those minor modifications.
Yes.
Okay, thanks for the summary, Kristen. We will go to the general public to see if anybody wants to speak in support of this. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support. Third and final call, anybody that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition? Third and final call, anybody who wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go back to the committee. Committee, this is your time for questions. Jonathan, go ahead.
This is sort of just more technical. The PDF that I'm looking at from the website is different than this. And I know you said you just made some comments. Is there a way that you can send us this revised PDF? That's my question.
Yes, probably not on the fly, but I believe maybe I don't know which one's the more current version on. Let me do a split screen. Are there major differences that you're seeing, Jonathan, that you have concern of?
There's like all kinds of stuff that's crossed out in mine and the different language.
And the reason that we did this is because it did get passed in the IRC, so that's why we had to update it.
So Kristen, can you comment, do you know which version is the most recent? Is it the one on the right of the screen or the one on the left?
The one on the right is the most recent version, I believe.
Okay. So Jonathan, unless we can quickly somehow do that, I don't believe there's an opportunity. We could table this if you feel like there's enough differences between what you guys got as your homework to review versus what's on the screen. We can table that for that reason.
Well, I mean, I guess it's kind of hard to tell. If you scroll through both of them, it's kind of big and like, I don't know, is all of that stuff crossed out?
And yeah, I mean, the only real updates are the version number and the green guard added. The stuff that's crossed out. So we did also update the language so that it's more contained, right? So we're not repeating the same information 3 times, 4 times for each material category. So that's why there's probably so much crossed out. So we just tried to simplify the language so that it's pertaining to all of those categories. And then we don't list the emissions requirement 4 times.
I'll leave both versions up on the screen for you all, and we'll go to the next question. I know, Jonathan, you probably have some other questions on that as you're looking back and forth, but we do have another hand up, so we'll go to that one first. Adam.
Yeah, I just have a couple clarifying questions because I am a little confused like Jonathan is about what I'm looking at. But the addition of the Green Guard certification, is that directly related to the VOC emissions, and are all the other standards within the other categories? So in other words, is floor score in flooring, is green, SCA South Coast Air Quality Management District for paints and coatings and adhesives and sealants, are those in those specific categories? And is that why we only have Green Guard Gold or Green Guard in the low volatile organic compound? I guess.
Yeah, I know it's complicated. So the Green Guard Gold only really applies to the CDPH standard methodology of how the VOCs are tested. So there's two requirements here, especially for the, applied products, right? There's the VOC content, which is the SAQMD requirement or standard methodology. And then there's how it's tested. So the Green Guard Gold covers the testing methodology. In terms of floor score, that's a great comment because floor score is different, or like a CRI label would be different, would use the same methodology. But since those categories were approved in the IRC, but not the IBC, we should clarify that here for those commercial projects.
Okay, and the last thing I'm noticing is I think that you want to say the total volatile organic compound, TVOCs, and not just VOCs. Is that correct if you're talking about emissions?
So yes, that is correct.
Okay, so we can make that change when we need to.
Yeah, so Kevin, instead of saying VOC, it's TVOC limits, emission limits. You have to go up on the one on the right.
To the top, yeah.
Okay, any other questions at this time? Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this has come up a couple times, and I don't know, maybe somebody even asked already, but the whole reference to elective and mandatory in an elective code, I'm still confused by that whole thing. And so I guess I'm wondering why why is that there?
That's legacy language from when we were making a recommendation. And I think what the city has, said on past code hearings is that once everything gets approved or disapproved, we will look at it measure by measure to figure out what is approximate to the other compliance pathways like LEED Platinum. So we will determine, what equates, if they're using the DGC as written pathway, what is considered mandatory or elective. And I don't know if the folks from the city want to elaborate on that.
I think that's exactly what we were talking about. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of the decision and differentiation between the mandatory and the elective that's intended to be captured later on in the process versus being vetted out through this committee time, but also looking to specify the requirement when it comes to residential versus commercial. But I think we will iron that out once we get through hearings.
Thank you. Adam, I see your hand still up. Did you have another question? Oh, okay. Any other questions at this time? Okay, seeing none, we will now go into the discussion period, or if you wanted to make a motion, now is your opportunity to do so. Adam, go ahead.
So now my hand's up again. So Kristen, are you gonna wanna add all those third-party certifications that align with the TVOC testing? Because there's a bunch of them. I don't know if you want to put them all in there.
Yeah, I mean, the intent was not to do that.
Okay.
The feedback we received was that this, in a Colorado code, we're referencing a California standard, right? That is the national standard, right? That LEED and other certifications use. So it's kind of hard to remove that entirely. And so the closest that we could come was this Green Guard standard, which I believe is very similar, right? Also the Green Seal standards. So I would rather not list all of those out, but I do see it as a potential issue. However, they are using those same testing procedures in the CDPH, for floor score and for the CRI. So I would adjust that language if necessary to be clear.
Okay, well, yeah, maybe we can just do a or equivalent kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
Any other discussions, or does anybody want to make a motion? Daniel?
I thought I had heard before that this is already in the Denver Green Code. What's in my Denver Green Code looks totally different, but at the same time, this is proposed as a revision, and the stuff that looks different is not underlined. I'm very confused. Does anyone have insight? Because I certainly would pass this, especially. I mean, we have a whole section in the current Green Code. If this is that same section with some minor revisions that are underlined, I'd certainly support that. But if it's totally different, I'd like to know.
So I didn't actually put this one, the language together. So I don't know why it's not all underlined, but this matches what was presented and adopted in the IRC. The thinking was to move some of those measures over to base code, right? And then to allow additional categories that were harder to achieve, maintain in the DGC. You are correct in that this language, it was in the DGC already. So if this doesn't get passed, right, we will revert back to the old language, which is just a different way of organizing it, minus a few minor changes for updates.
Okay, understood. Yeah, I do see it's mostly the organization that's different. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion? Anybody want to make a motion? Jonathan?
One more question. So it seems like we're only covering indoor air quality with these VOC emissions, and we're not dealing with anything sort of outside of the weather barrier in terms of VOC emissions outside of the building.
Correct. So inside of the weatherproofing system and applied on site, correct?
Yeah, so I guess my question is, like, was there thoughts about just including everything?
I don't think that was discussed, but definitely open to that conversation.
I mean, this isn't really my wheelhouse, but I guess that my thinking is that, I mean, it's sort of well established that the VOCs that are floating around the air are contributing to the terrible ozone that we have on the Front Range. So I'd be interested in something that also looks to address that in addition to indoor air quality.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Adam.
So Jonathan, the reason it's not typically addressed is because it gets diluted outside, and I guess it's not as much of an issue on the health of the manufacturer workers and the people that are inside the building when it's outside. I think that's the thought process on that, but yeah, it's definitely destructive. I would actually like to make a motion to amend that
first paragraph to include after Green Guard Environmental Institute GGPS dot 001 standard for building materials and finishes or equivalent. So it's on that last sentence of the first paragraph there. After the word finishes, sorry. You're almost there. Just push it down the sentence a little bit more. Yep, there.
And so you just wanted to make a motion to add that, is that correct?
Yeah, and then Kristen, should we add the composite wood as letter H, or we don't need to do that? I was a little confused by that.
It's in C technically.
Oh, it's in C. Well, not really.
Well, MDF, OSB.
Oh yeah, sorry, under there. MDF. It doesn't say particle board. It does say particle board. Okay, that's fine. You can leave that off. Thanks. It's
Okay.
good.
There's a motion to add or equivalent in this first section there. Is there a second? This is just for adding those words or equivalent. It's not for the approval of everything. Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, before I second, Adam, I'm curious, what equivalents do you have in mind, or are you just kind of future proofing, the specific reference to Green Guard?
Both. There's SCS Indoor Advantage, there's CARB, there's SAQMD, there's MOS certified green. There's a lot of certifications around TVOCs that could fall into that paragraph there.
Just a clarification,
Go ahead, Kristen.
oh, sorry, that Green Guard is the standard, not necessarily the certification.
Right, but you could use
Eric,
those standards, right, in place of Green Guard, I guess is what I'm thinking.
Right, there, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Eric, and I didn't hear you.
Second the modification.
Great. That's what I thought you said, so I just wanted to make sure. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call a vote just on that. All those in favor of adding or equivalent in that paragraph, please raise your hand. And I see 11. That's unanimous. Okay, that passes. Okay, anybody else want to make a motion now or have further discussion?
I'll make a motion to pass it as is, the proposal as is.
Okay. Approve as amended. All right. Eric?
I will second to approve as amended.
Okay, great. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, there is a motion to approve as amended and a second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And I have 11. That's unanimous. Okay, so it passes as amended. All right, a little time check here. We are a little over halfway. I will put, let's do 8 minutes on the clock. Feel free to turn off your cameras, do what you need to do. We'll see you back in 8 minutes. All right, if you can hear my voice, let's start making our way back. All right, welcome back. We will jump to the next item of business, which is 85A. Kristen, I believe this one's also yours. Actually, you have the rest of them here from here on out. No? Not yours.
Actually, I think that one's going to be me.
Oh, okay.
Kira's doing the next.
Let's see. Why don't we check in just real quick, though, make sure we still have quorum 369. Yeah, we look good.
Okay. So since it's yours, do you want to give us a summary?
Yeah, so 85A has to do with indoor air quality maintenance and monitoring. I think as we discussed earlier, we will put that project elective language aside for the moment. And this was pulled from the IGCC 2021 and then slightly adjusted for Denver, and it provides requirements for operational plans around outdoor air quality monitoring and filtration when levels of PM 2.5 and ozone reach regulatory limits outside. And so, and it refers to section 801.3.1.3 in the current DGC for those filtration specs. So let me know if you need any deep dive into that section. Otherwise, I think this one's fairly straightforward, and that probably covers the summary.
Great, thank you. I will go to the general public to see if anybody wants to speak in support. Please raise your hand. Anybody that wants to speak for support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Anybody who wants to speak in opposition? Third and final call, anybody from the general public wants to speak in opposition? Seeing none, I'll go to the committee. Committee, this is your time for questions. Jonathan.
So I have a question about the PM 2.5, the areas identified by the US EPA. I guess I'm questioning, sorry.
Denver does fall outside of that, by the way. Denver is located in a non-attainment area.
So essentially the whole city has too much PM 2.5. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, as defined by the US EPA. Yeah.
Okay, well then if the whole city, if everywhere falls under it, then that answers my question, so I'm good.
Next question comes from Adam.
I would actually like a reminder about the filtration in that section. Yeah, is that just MERV 13 and up, or is it different? In section 801.3.1.3.
It is a MERV 8.
Oh, it's a MERV 8.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That is in the current DGC as written, and we did not include any language. We didn't propose. I believe. No, I don't see here that we proposed changing that, and I don't know. I'm maybe not quite familiar enough with the process. If that's something we could look at in this process, or if that would need to be done separately.
That would be my follow-up question, Kara, too.
Kevin, do you
So
have any?
I think there's an opportunity if we want to be more stringent than that section 801.3.1.3 that's highlighted. Somebody could make a motion to say MERV 13 instead of MERV 8. Since we know that it's a MERV 8, somebody could do that. But we wouldn't change that section. We would just change the language in this proposal.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Oh, you know what? I was actually reading that for PM10. For 2.5, it is 13.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Still an opportunity to change that if you want to go more stringent. Seeing that there are no more questions, I'll go to the open discussion part of the conversation. Anybody want to make a motion or have further discussion? Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In section 1001.4B, the last portion requires the filter from June 21st through December 21st in terms of air quality and temperature gradients in our area. I would actually propose striking the range and just requiring it, period, throughout the year. I mean, it's been 80 degrees in February, and we know the air quality isn't spectacular. So I don't see any reason to limit it, especially with this being the green code. So that's I guess I'm not sure if I apologize, Mr. Rob, moderator. I'm not sure if we're at the point where I can make a motion. I feel like are we? Okay. Well, in that case, I will make a motion to delete the date range there in item B, which would in effect require all year round.
I'll second.
Okay. Okay, Adam seconds that. Any discussion on that? Okay. Any other comments? Anybody else have any? We can vote on that separately, but if anybody's thinking that they want to make another modification, we can do that now too, just to save some time, but we don't have to. Okay, I'll call a vote then. All those in favor of modifying, and we're only voting on the modification, section 1001.4, section B, taking out the date range from June 21st through December 21st. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I see 9. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 1. Go ahead and lower your hands. And all those abstaining, raise your hand. 0. Okay, so that passes. Now there's an opportunity to make another motion or have further discussion. Eric.
I move to approve as amended. Is
there a second? Christy.
I would second.
Okay, great. Any discussion? No discussion? Okay. Then I'll call a vote. There is a motion to approve as amended and a second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. 9. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 0. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. 1. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. So that passes. So that brings us to our next item of business.
That was a record
85.
speed.
Yeah, that's great. We might actually get through a whole agenda. That would be awesome. Next one up is 85B. And Kristen, I do believe this one is yours. No, man, my notes are all off. Okay. Carol, why don't you go ahead?
85B really follows very directly up from 85A, and also I think originally also follows the thinking of the benchmarking beyond energy that we had talked about in a previous hearing. So this one is about indoor environmental quality assurance and awareness. And again, just ignore that project elective language for now. This requires that a survey be implemented within a period of 6 to 18 months after issuance of the certificate of occupancy, and then repeated not less often than once every 3 years, and should include questions about satisfaction and diagnostic questions for lighting, acoustics, and thermal comfort. And then, of course, we have some remediation requirements depending on those results. And then the second part is to promote awareness, and that requires that the survey results, both quantitative and qualitative, be available to occupants either on display screens that are no less than 1 per 3,500 square feet, or on a website or a phone application. So I think that covers this one.
Thank you. All right, general public, this is your time to speak in support. Anybody that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Third and final call for anybody that wants to speak in support. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public wants to speak in opposition. Seeing none, I'll go to the committee. Committee, it is now time for questions. Anybody from the committee have any questions? Daniel.
I can't see it here on the screen, but in 1001X2, I believe, it talks about concentrations of the parameters measured and qualitative results of air quality. Does it say anywhere here what is being measured? Because before there was a survey of comfort, I imagine that this is something else, like air quality, and I don't know what specifically is being measured.
That is a great question, Daniel, and I feel like I might have to give it a little bit of thought, given the back and forth that we got to this on and when that happened.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
All right. We'll give you some time there to look that up. We got some other questions though, so we'll go to the next one and maybe we can come back to Daniel's. Adam, you're up next.
Yeah, I'd actually like to lean on Daniel's code language skills a little bit in the section above. If you could scroll up to 101.x.1, C1 and C2. I don't really, I guess I'm wondering if there's a way we can word that better and also include an actual percentage of a response rate so that people don't have to go to ASHRAE standard 55, section 7.31 and 7.41 and look up what the minimum response rate is, which is what I think that's asking for, but I think the language is a little unclear. So I'd like to address that when the time comes, and maybe some of you all can help with that.
Yeah, I I think that's reasonable and definitely would be helpful to readers to not have to go reference ASHRAE on that one.
Okay, next question comes from Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. With respect to 1001X.1, item A indicates that the survey needs to be implemented with a period within 6 to 18 months after issuance of certificate of occupancy. For larger multi-use buildings, multi-tenant buildings, it could take it very potentially could certainly take much longer to occupy a building, maybe towards a certain percentage, which feels like what we're trying to get at here. Not looking at this on a particular tenant by tenant space, or maybe if that is the case, we should be more explicit about the particular space. Otherwise, I might recommend, instead of a time frame following the certificate of occupancy, maybe we base it on not less than 80% of total building occupancy or something like that, or we pivot to the tenant space itself, if that's what we're really trying to capture. So just to get some thoughts there, not necessarily a question.
Sure. So Kara, as the proponent, would you be willing and open to potentially modifying that from a time period to maybe a percentage?
Yeah, definitely. Would we want to say a time period after a percentage of occupancy is achieved? That's, I guess, as Eric was saying that, that's what I was kind of envisioning.
Yeah, I would almost, we could do both, or keep 6 to 18 months, from 75, 80% occupancy, whatever we feel is appropriate there. But yeah, that could definitely work.
Great. Any other questions at this time? I see no other questions from the committee. Committee, this is your time for further discussion amongst each other or to make a motion.
And I did solve the mystery that Daniel brought up. Looked back through some documents and am remembering that 85A and 85B were originally one proposal. So that concentration of the parameters measured would be the PM 2.5 and the ozone that we would be filtering out. So if you think, do you think it would work to then maybe just reference back to that code section in B2, the concentration of parameters measured in section? Now I have to go back and see what that section number would be.
Yeah, that 803, well, whatever it was.
No,
Yeah.
I think it would be of 1001.4, I think is what the previous, the monitoring section for 85A.
Yeah, it's 1001.4. Yep. So just this is clerical, I'll just say, I'll put that in there just so we're all clear. Okay, Christy, go ahead.
If we do that, is it then clear what the thresholds would be that would trigger the need for remediation? Because if there are different standards and there are different, I don't know, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I think similar to the question about adding in the actual numbers. Oh gosh, can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry, my screens are flashing on and off. today, all of a sudden, so went black for a moment. I think similar to the question about the ASHRAE standard above, I think we could also we could maybe just pull in those EPA limits.
Okay, thanks.
Any other discussion? Anybody want to make a motion? Daniel, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I had discussion if we're still open for that.
Absolutely.
So going back to 1001X1, there's a change between where the survey shall be implemented, and then a plan for reporting the survey shall be produced. So it sounds like the survey is actually taking place, but when it comes to the report, it doesn't say the survey should be reported. It says a plan for reporting. I would propose maybe to change that to a survey report, or reporting of the survey shall be produced. I don't see why one would be just planning for it in the future versus this. Either this is all something, the survey and the reporting is planned for the future, or the reporting shall take place. So I would prefer the C change to the reporting the survey, a report of the survey results would be the correct language. A report of the survey results shall be produced. And I would also change under C in item 2, I'm sorry, in item 4, the word will to the word shall, just to make it more code appropriate. And I agree that I would also prefer if the standard, the criteria in the standard were just spelled out. I think that was a really good suggestion. But of course, we don't know what that is offhand.
Okay, and that's okay. We can have an intent to put those in, so we don't have to waste time doing that right now, if that's what someone wants to do.
Okay, so I would then like to put forth a motion to amend as discussed and to pass.
Okay, and then Daniel, did you also want to, with the intent to put in those values?
Correct.
I'm just making notes. And those values are ASHRAE and the PM 2.5 and ozone, correct? Is there anything else I missed?
Correct. I'm still unclear if maybe there's a standard for the final item in the proposal for the air quality. I didn't understand whether that was resolved yet. So in 1001X2, the last item 3, qualitative results of air quality, is that also from section 1001.4 or not? I'm unclear on
that. I think that I referenced this from the well building initiative, and I think that really just refers to the data visualization in either the display screen, the phone app, or the website.
So it's more about the graphics you're saying about the color coding?
Well, I guess it would need to show, say, on a color coded level, how the air quality performed. So if it's poor or good or outstanding. I hear what you're saying. I'm thinking how we reword this to adequately describe that.
Okay, well, we can think on that. There is a motion on the table for the time being, but I do see another hand up. Travis, I saw your hand go down, and know if you wanted to add something there or not. You're on
You're
mute,
muted.
by the way.
I guess I clicked the hand button instead of the mute. Sorry. I guess if the motion's on the table, we can just continue with this. I was just gonna pipe in on just the awareness side of things, but I think I'm late.
Okay. Well, you feel free to pipe in still, even though there's a motion on the table, there's opportunity for discussion.
I guess just something, this is an elective item. So it's, obviously some people are going to pick a la carte out of the code here. I don't see that this is going to be an item that would be selected from single family to multifamily on the residential side, especially anything under the IRC. The awareness side of things, I understand that part of this code is to try and bring awareness to the general population, but I don't see how putting displays every 3,500 square feet is going to provide any results unless people open the door and have extra stress because the building they live in has a red coat on it every other day. But so I guess I'm just not seeing the point of that entire 1001.x.2 right now. But anyway, that's my 2 cents.
No, that's great. That's part of the discussion period. So absolutely. Thanks for speaking up on that. Any other discussion? There's an opportunity to further discuss, but there's also a motion on the table. Adam?
Travis, that's a great point. I wonder if, Daniel, you could modify your motion to cross out the strike the second sentence of 101.x.2a2. So signs are present indicating. I think if you have it on a website or on someone's phone, it's going to be a lot more useful than putting signs up.
So I am willing to do that on item 2. If it's on the website, then people hopefully know about that website. I agree. We could strike the second sentence in 1001x2 as part of this motion. I would also, I think we've done this before, to address the previous concern that the environmental quality awareness is not something that's as fitting to every building as much as maybe 1001x1 is with the survey. And I would also like to modify the 1001x2 be a separate credit from 1001x1. So they're not the same credit. You can do one and not the other. And that's something more for how this is kind of gets written into the ultimate version of the green code. I don't know that it could be quite captured. Christy, do you know how we would capture that as part of a motion? I'm not sure.
I feel like we could capture it as part of the motion, just that we would be passing the intent and saying that we're going to separate these, and then we'll just have to figure out the formatting afterwards. I think that's okay.
Okay, that would be my preference because they're really distinct efforts. I think a survey and making improvements to based on the survey is separate from the awareness piece.
Okay, so Daniel, you're adding to your motion to strike the sentence on 1001.x.2a2, last sentence on there, and to make that entire section 1001.x.2 a separate credit.
Thank you, yes.
Okay. So that is the current motion on the table. Eric, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Daniel, if you'll allow it, I would also like to further modify the existing modification to change 1001.x.1 item A to remove the language that says their certificate of occupancy, and to replace that with 6 to 18 months after 80% of total building occupancy.
Daniel, are you okay with that on your motion? Daniel, you're on mute.
Sorry, I had to find the button there for a minute. So I certainly agree. I would encourage Eric, maybe we find a different percentage, because there are buildings that stay at, 80%, like a rental apartment building is going to stay at a somewhat not fully occupied for that's kind of typical for those buildings to not be fully occupied. I don't know 80%, but they're
Right. I think it's a matter of finding the balance between ensuring that a building is occupied enough to provide valid results, versus, that transitionary occupancies that we're going to have consistently with commercial and residential spaces. But I'm open to a different percentage. I feel like it needs to be, high enough so that we can hit that. There is no percentage requirement for the triannual follow-up surveys, but something up there. I don't know, 70, 80%.
okay, this works.
Yep. And Mr. Moderator, if you would also strike the word issuance at the front of those edits. Thank you.
Okay. So Daniel, are you okay with 80, or did you want to make that a different number?
That's fine.
Okay. Travis, your hand's up next.
Yeah, I guess I was looking at that verbiage added, and if we're talking occupancy, I'm guessing, how are we calculating that? Because like in a multifamily building, if you're doing the gross occupancy amounts, usually it's much higher than like a leased up building. So I'm wondering, I don't know if anybody has any solutions there. And then I was also looking at the second section as well. I also like that we're talking about splitting these apart, because I think they're two separate things. I'm not sure about the display screens and the 3,500 per square, one per 3,500 square feet. I mean, maybe the display screen is just at the building entrance in a common space. I'm not necessarily, it seems like, in practice, you end up going, it's like you end up placing stuff up around a building, and you're just gonna have a bunch of TV screens in weird places and hallways or nooks just to meet that amount in a large building. I don't know. It seems like overload. So it's a 1. It's 1001.x.2.8.1. So I don't know, and I don't want to propose an amendment unless anybody else wants to agree on this, but I would say just 1 at building entry or primary point of entry into the building.
Mr. Moderator, I'd be open to make a change. So display screen, singular. And after the word feet, to strike the rest and put in a publicly shared space within the building.
Okay. Next hand up is Eric.
Thank you. Yeah, speaking to this item that was just amended, 8.1, I think we need to consider the situations where you have multi-tenant spaces. And so I would actually request a different modification, if Daniel's open to it, since this is his modification, but maybe after 5.6 feet, we keep with at least 1 display. We could put, per building, public entrance and tenant suite. or something like that, so that you can catch it if you come in the door, sort of thing, off the main level. But if you go in any particular suite, it's you definitely have different air quality depending on where you're at in the building. And I think only having one, and especially using the term publicly shared space, there are a lot of restricted areas and spaces that are challenging to access and wouldn't provide for visibility to that screen. So I think we need to look at amending that to serve the purpose that is intended. The awareness that's provided for the occupants isn't going to be there.
I appreciate that. I think even the 3,500 square foot didn't necessarily require that every tenant space in the building have its own display screen. So I wouldn't want to do more than that. So I would, and let me know, Eric, what you think about doing publicly shared space within the building or within each tenant space. So that if there isn't that publicly shared space, I mean, it already says prominently positioned. So this has to be, if it's a publicly shared space, but it's a bathroom, that's not prominently positioned. So I think the display screen being required to be prominently positioned already means that it has to be in an area that gets high visibility. But I do see where you could have a building that doesn't have a shared space, and therefore each tenant space would require a display screen. So it doesn't have a lobby, for example. Does that work?
I would be hesitant to require only a single screen in the front entrance of a building that's got 60 suites in it. That doesn't seem like it's meeting the intent of these provisions. I agree with you that the 3,500 square foot was, to me anyway, a bit of a challenging number to work with. I think having a screen prominently positioned at the, within the suite of each, or within the tenant space for each tenant would be fine. I don't know that these are probably, a couple $100 screens, so it's not like we're breaking the bank asking for them to put these in. It's a glorified thermostat with a different display.
Mm-hmm. How about a publicly shared space on each floor? So it would be the elevator lobby.
That's better. Yeah.
Yeah, keep that. Sorry. Or so. I'm sorry. Sorry. Go back. Keep the language that was there previously. So where it says publicly shared space, right after that on each story.
You like story or floor?
Stories.
Did I capture that correctly?
Yeah, and you could take out within the building. I think story implies that's in the building. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that works for me. Okay. I think if we're going to modify this on the fly and not postpone approving something, this is this kind of works. I know it would be best to spend a significant amount of time getting it totally
right. Great. Christy, your hand's up next.
So I'm over here hand wringing over something that maybe somebody else can tell me isn't that I'm off track on. We are talking about this kind of in terms of an office building, and then we sort of touched on multifamily residential building, but there are other building types where there would be different systems serving types of spaces. So I'll just take, for example, a university building is going to have all different types of spaces, or a school or something. And so, we're saying percentage occupied And we could say percentage occupied, we could say 80% occupied based on gross square footage. And then we could have these monitoring devices and the readings. But if the different spaces are being handled by different mechanical systems or in different ways, or the tenants have control over how those systems run, then won't that affect the readouts in the different spaces enough that having something that applies to the whole building isn't going to be relevant? And so would we need to break it down to make it relevant data? Or am I just missing something in my logic?
Daniel, go ahead.
So I think it depends on that other code reference to 1001, it was 0.4 maybe, because that's what this data is. So unless that requirement is per space and it's collected per space, then that won't be available to communicate on that display as being per space. So it really is not, in my mind, part of this code, but it's an excellent question in terms of the other code section that is not about presenting, but about collecting the data.
And that one kind of, because I looked at that and I think that one's going by building, not by space type, which I think might start to get us into getting away from the intent on this. I think we might have missed a layer of complexity here.
It's certainly a good place to start. And I think that typically building occupants have some effect on the entire building. If, you know, a portion of the building is doing something that's extremely, you know, irresponsible, you know, if they're aware of it, they'll then be vocal about it. So I don't know that this is not a good place to at least start with having awareness.
If we're talking about PM 2.5s and ozone, then okay. Yeah, I mean, you're probably right. I guess I could see how it could go awry in a building that has more than one system serving different types of spaces. But we could start with it and we could think about that for the future.
Maybe in the future, also, you know, maybe there are other things that you want to add, like the TVOC, or, you know, carbon monoxide, or, you know, or other indoor pollutants that are specific. But maybe just something to keep thinking about. I mean, I think that probably adds to the issue you have, and it doesn't solve it. But just thinking through it, that came to mind.
Yeah, there's that too. I mean, I'm just thinking. I realize, Travis, you're saying that we don't think that multifamily would necessarily want to go this route, but if multifamily did go this route, it would be completely dependent, like that's unit by unit control. So their air quality is going to be very dependent unit by unit on what they do, including PM 2.5s and ozone. So if this weren't monitored in a case like that, unit by unit, it would not be relevant data for the entire building in any way. So I'm wondering if the applicability section needs to change while we keep it at this whole building scale, just so that we don't have something that's really disconnected. Like, do we want to change the applicability, or is it too specific to start taking out building types? I don't know. I guess we could leave it like this. It feels like there are going to be some instances where it's really illogical.
I think for now, it either will be utilized by the appropriate building type, or it will at least raise an awareness that your neighbors are, you know, not living up to their part of the deal. I think that it would benefit for the future to have a separate portion of this tailored to multifamily. That's certainly.
Yeah, and other building types too, unfortunately.
I would, Mr. Moderator, like to propose based on to add a modification to 1001X1 based on previous conversation under item A. So the language 80% of total building occupancy, the word total, I'd like to modify the word total to be intended. So it's not based on square footage, it's based on the occupancy goals of the business or management.
Okay. All right, a lot of modifications here, which is great. You know, I like them all being out separate or all being out at once and having the discussion on that so that we don't have to vote 10,000 times. But we can vote 10,000 times if you feel strongly enough that one of these items is not something that you would like, that's fine too. But currently I'll recap. We have a motion on the table to approve with the intent to modify, and the modifications are what we discussed and are green on the screen. In addition to a further modify with the intent to add the values from ASHRAE and the PM 2.5 and ozone, and a further intent to modify by separating out section 1001.x.2 as its own credit. So that's the motion on the table currently. So I'll ask if there is a second. If there isn't a second, we will break this up individually and talk about it that way, which is absolutely fine.
No, please, I'll second it.
Okay, all right. All right, so I'll ask for discussion one last time here before I call a vote. Okay, being no, oh, sorry, Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, no, don't need to belabor this. I just want to reinforce that I think this is a good starting point in the green code for this, and it'll give us an opportunity to review and revise it in future years, but to get it in there to start, I think is a great idea.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a vote. So that was a long-winded explanation. I will not repeat that, but I think we didn't have enough discussion in there in between what I just explained for me to repeat it. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. And I have 10, which is unanimous. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. All right, I might have jinxed us. We have item 67B. I knew it. Eric called it. Don't jinx us. 67B. Kristen, I believe this one's yours. Hopefully, maybe not. Let's see.
It is, and just really quick, just wanted to say, I think if we lose anyone at this point, we will lose quorum. So I think that the only people we had down who were leaving early have gone. But if any of you needed to step away, just FYI.
No pressure. Eric, go ahead.
Mr. Moderator, a point of order. May I request that the committee vote currently while we have quorum, that if we happen to lose quorum in the next half hour, we can continue without having to defer or delay any more of this?
Sure, we can do that. Is there a second on that? Travis?
I'll second that.
Okay. All right, all those in favor? Raise your hand. Okay, we got unanimous. All right, cool. Very good. Good forward thinking there. All right, 67B, let's continue. Kristen, you want to give us a summary?
Sure, sorry. This one I think should be really straightforward. Most of this language is already in the DGC, and the intent here is to, instead of saying where you're using an automatic controller for irrigation, we're saying you must use an automatic smart controller with EV and weather data to adjust the irrigation schedule. So basically we're saying, instead of if you're using one, it has to be smart. 2, you need to use a smart controller.
Okay, very good. I see a couple hands up just for point of order. I want to make sure that there's nothing that we need. Keith, I see your hand up. You have something to add? Nope. Okay. I'll go to general public. General public, anybody wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public who wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition. Third and final call for opposition. Seeing none, I'll go to the committee. Committee, this is your time for questions. Any questions from the committee? Seeing no questions, we'll go to the discussion period, or if someone wants to make a motion. Eric.
I move to approve as submitted.
Okay, there's a motion to approve. I see another hand, Daniel.
Second.
Okay, there's a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will call a vote. All those in favor of approving as written, please raise your hand. I see 10, unanimous. Okay, that passes. Oh boy, we're getting close. 32B, Kristen, take it away.
All right, last one on the agenda. This is very exciting. This is about established tree preservation. And so the name has changed from the tree preservation and primary and side street setbacks to established tree preservation. And this is really to extend tree preservation to private property. And so there are requirements in terms of what an established tree is that are listed there. There are some exceptions noted there about tree canopy interfering with construction. So I think this one is fairly straightforward.
Okay, I see a couple hands up. They're probably left over. I'll make sure Adam or Daniel didn't have anything to add.
I actually do. Is this an add-on to the last proposal we looked at in regards to established tree preservation?
I have the same question. We voted on this already.
Yeah, I thought so.
I think this is just for us to re-see the updates that were made after that conversation to pick up the comments.
Thank you. Is that the stuff in yellow? The information in yellow that has been added?
I can't see that on the screen.
I believe so.
It's not on the screen, Daniel. It's on the agenda on it's a different document.
Oh, understood.
Yeah. Yeah, see, there you go.
Okay, and just as a point of order there, I'm looking at my notes, and it passed 13 to 3 to 0, 2 exceptions, and the committee go to a committee to modify the percentage there. So that was what you all had voted on in the past. So that was a point of order. Let's go to the general public. General public, anybody who wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support. Third and final call. Anybody that wants to speak in support? Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody who wants to speak in opposition? Third and final call. Anybody who wants to speak in opposition? Seeing none, I'll go to the committee. Committee, this is your time for questions. Anybody have any questions on this? Seeing none, I'll go to the discussion and or motion. Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. To provide information to all of the committee with respect to the particular language in this proposal, we need to make sure that it's clear that while we are voting on green code provisions, there are other agencies within the city and county of Denver that have regulatory authority over trees. And it is our intent to coordinate with them to ensure that there are no essentially objections or concerns regarding the language herein, which we believe is good language, but we also need to respect our partners in other departments as well. So that being said, while I am in support of advancing the language, I think it's necessary to inform the committee that we will coordinate with our partners in parks and forestry and DOTI as necessary to again ensure that this is kosher from their perspective as well.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Or does anybody want to make a motion? Daniel.
Motion to approve as written here.
Okay, great. Eric?
I'll second.
Okay. I'll ask for any discussion. There's a motion to approve and a second. I'll call a vote, seeing that there's no, Adam jumped the gun a little bit there. Jonathan, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I guess one of the things I'm wondering about this is whether, as we like densify single family neighborhoods and multifamily buildings that use a little bit more of the lot are put on what are now currently residential streets, are we going to risk the benefits of densifying neighborhoods to save a tree or two? Like, are we willing to lose, I don't know, say you have to pull a building back, so you lose a stack of units. So are we willing to lose 5 homes or 10 homes for that? I don't know. I guess I'd be interested if anybody else has thoughts on that. I mean, in general, I'm supportive of this, but I'm just wondering whether there could be some unintended consequences.
Sure. Anybody have any input on that? Daniel.
So I worked on the modified language here and can say that we considered that as and kind of analyzed what, the tree has to be located within the required setback. So no one's building in that required setback, and that's where at least the trunk of the tree is located. So then you have a canopy which has a limited, typically, size, and a portion of that could be going over the property. But if more than 35% of that canopy is over where you wanted to construct, that's the exception. So you're then allowed to take down that tree. So it's only, we're talking about less than the 35%. So the 35% of the canopy and only on one side of the tree would be what you would lose in terms of an area that you would otherwise be constructing in. So our assessment was that's probably like a 7-foot loss just for that area where the tree canopy is in terms of a further setback potentially. So again, this is only for trees that are located in the setback. Of course, the canopy might be located beyond that, but only to a limited degree. Once you have more than that degree of the canopy extending and getting in the way of construction, you use the exception. I don't know if that's helpful.
Thanks, Daniel, for helping out with that. Travis?
Yeah, so I kind of was reflecting back on this a little bit here and there. So I probably should have spoken up wise. And I can't recall if we brought it up earlier, but did we talk about tree replacement as part of feasibility that met the caliper sizes of the previous code sections that were established? Because that's something that appears in a lot of codes. I mean, obviously, getting rid of a 20-year-old tree and replanting it with a 5 caliber tree is not going to be great, but it does seem like that's something that could make this happen in a more meaningful manner in regard to maintaining landscapes and tree and shading. But I don't remember if we talked about that.
Go ahead, Daniel.
I'm not really responding to that. I had another comment, but in response, I would say that that it's certainly not in here to replace a tree. Again, it's not equivalent to replace a younger tree with an established tree, and the purpose of this is to try to protect the established trees. But just to add something I forgot to mention before in response to maybe it was Jonathan, was that an arborist, that's the final sentence that was added to the section before the exception, is that a certified arborist can trim the tree up to 1/3. So again, you have a tree that's located in the setback, so only a portion of the canopy is in an area that you could have constructed in, and you can probably trim a whole bunch of that. So you really, even the 7 foot that I mentioned, you probably wouldn't lose even that much by trying to save that tree if you hired a certified arborist to try to keep the tree healthy while trimming it to allow the construction. So just another note that that's in there, that trimming should also help with the concern that the tree might get in the way of construction.
Okay. Travis, I don't know if anybody has anything to add to your question or comment or concern there. But I'll ask.
I do have one
Go
note
ahead,
that we
Kristen.
did not talk about the replacement. We talked about this proposal in the first hearing, and I don't see, I'm looking back in the notes, I don't see anything about tree replacement.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because the calipers established in the other code section aren't much lower than the baseline of this code section. And it's something that is done in Boulder County. And, you know, big picture, what this also allows, and maybe we should just have a comment about health of the tree because, you know, Jonathan's talking about a dense environment and you're putting this in a 3 or 4 store building and this tree is in the north side setback. I mean, you're going to effectively kill that tree no matter what, right? You're going to cut it off from sunlight. So the 1-for-1 provides an out and some flexibility in development, but it also does lead to a greater amount of trees. And it's something that's done in Boulder County pretty regularly. And I don't think that was part of this section, but it seems like it was a pretty feasible thing and it's provided pretty positive outcome, I think, as far as maintaining landscape. But
we also do have a lot of tree requirements in terms of numbers of trees in the landscaping requirements proposal we heard also in code hearing 1. So if we were to amend this, we would have to double check and make sure it would be agreeable to that other proposal that we made.
yeah, it would definitely have to say like in compliance with that section or something along those lines. But since this is a mandatory item, and I guess maybe it's not defined as mandatory. Anyway, just thought.
Well, thanks for sharing with that, Travis, and maybe others have the same concern. Adam, you're up next.
Yeah, I want to respond to Travis. I think that although that's probably a good idea, it's just going to add a layer of complexity to this proposal that I don't think we want to go down that rabbit hole. You're going to start talking about what kind of tree it is, what type of tree it is, what, you know, you're just going to add a whole nother layer of descriptions and to this that I don't think that this needs right now. So that's my response to that.
Okay, next thing, Christy.
I think I also wanted to respond to Travis. I think from my perspective, this proposal isn't about quantity of trees because we are addressing that elsewhere. This one is specifically about the older established trees and what those trees support from, well, you know, from a character of neighborhood standpoint, but also from a biodiversity standpoint. It takes years for insects and animals to find a new tree and kind of set themselves up in that new tree. When you take down a large old tree, it's pretty disruptive. So the way that I read this proposal was that it really wasn't talking about creating new tree canopy or quantity of trees across Denver. It's really about those specific healthy, established trees and keeping them in place, because replacing with a new tree, you know, getting back the benefits that that old tree offered, it can take 5 or 10 years to get to that point, and the tree's still a fraction of the size of what we took out.
Okay, next hand is Daniel.
I just wanted to mention to Travis that as far as I'm aware, the city forester, just for general projects, so this is for the green code, but for general projects, definitely incorporates your idea. I've been involved as an architect for years on projects, and if you're in the right of way where the city forester has control, then they will, if they see a tree would die based on the construction, they'll have you swap that tree for, you know, 2 of their preferred tree. But again, it gets fairly detailed because they want to control exactly what that replacement looks like, where it's at, what species, etc. So putting that in this code, I agree, would be in this particular section would be complex, but it is something that Denver through a different agency does pursue.
I suppose that goes back to Eric's initial comment about other agencies in the city reviewing it, because I think the forester would also want to control like invasive species and items like that, because there are some trees that we actually don't want in the environment that might fall underneath established, because we're just talking about decay or disease, not invasive. So, you know, acting in good faith, that's going to be done with the forester, and those lines of thinking are going to be completed. You know, I could definitely vote on this. I just wanted to kind of make sure that that was discussed and clear.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Any other discussion? Being that there's no more discussion, there is a motion on the table and a second to approve as written on the screen. I will call a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I have 10. That's unanimous. You can go ahead and lower your hands. Wow, can you believe it? We made it through an agenda. And we made it through the code hearings. So this is our last hearing. I want to thank you all for participating and joining. We had quite a few hearings there. I know it was a lot of your time, but obviously you all are passionate about this, and I want to thank you all for participating and being loyal to your passion with what you do. Anything else, feel free to, I'll stop the recording, but feel free to stay on the line. I'll stay on the line as well, but thank you all. And if Eric or anybody or Christy or Courtney or anybody else from the city or anybody else wants to say anything, feel free.
I'll just say,